The wind, a razor of ice, tore at Ilara's thin shawl, mocking its inadequacy. Each gust carried the dying whimpers of her twins, Thomas and Lily, nestled precariously in the crook of her arms. Snow, thick and relentless, blurred the world into a vast, unforgiving white. This was it, then, the end her dear departed husband's family had ordained for them. Cast out, a widow with 2 babes, left to the mercy of a Dakota blizzard. If this scene of raw despair is already gripping your heart, you need to know this is just the beginning of her fight. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will touch you even deeper. But before the faint glimmer of hope, let me take you back to the very moment their world shattered. It had begun with a cough, her William's life stolen by a fever that swept through their small settlement like a phantom. One day he was strong, his laughter filling their modest cabin. The next, he was a memory, a gaping wound in Ilara's soul. His brother Silas and his mother Martha had descended upon her grief like vultures. Their eyes, hard as winter earth, held no solace, only calculation. The farm, they declared, barely enough for one family, certainly not enough for a widow and 2 mewling infants who weren't even strong enough to be sure bets for survival. Their words were colder than the January wind, now stealing her breath. A burden. Martha had pronounced, her face a mask of sour righteousness. You and yours. William should have married stronger stock. Silas, taller, leaner, with eyes that never quite met hers, had merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the meager possessions William had left, already claiming them in his mind. Ilara remembered the sting of those words, sharper than any physical blow. They hadn't even waited a respectable week. The accusations had followed swiftly. She was unlucky. She had drained William. The whispers grew, poisoning the small community against her. No one offered help. No one met her pleading eyes. Hope, a fragile bird, had been chased out of her heart, leaving only a hollow ache. If you've ever felt the sting of injustice, the desolation of being utterly alone, tap subscribe. Ilara's story is a testament to the strength found in the deepest despair. The final act of their cruelty had been swift. One morning, with the sky already spitting snow, Silas had arrived, his face impassive. You need to leave, Ilara. The farm is mine now. Mother needs caring for. There's no room. He gestured to the door, a dismissive flick of his wrist. He'd pressed a few coins into her hand, Judas money, she'd thought numbly, and a threadbare blanket. Go back to your own people, if they'll have you. Her people were graves in a distant churchyard, a fact he knew well. So she had walked, the twins clutched tight. Thomas, always the quieter one, was worryingly still. Lily let out thin, reedy cries that pierced Ilara's heart. She had stumbled away from the only home she had known since her marriage, away from the warmth of her hearth, out into the teeth of the rising storm. The wind carried stories of wolves, of men lost to the white wilderness, of death that came quiet and cold. She tried to hum a lullaby, but her lips were too stiff, her throat too tight with unshed tears. Hours passed, or perhaps it was an eternity. The snow became a blinding curtain. She found a small recess beneath a fallen pine, its branches offering scant protection. She huddled there, pulling the blanket tighter, tucking the babies against her own fading warmth. The cold was a living thing, seeping into her bones, dulling her senses. Despair was a heavy cloak, threatening to suffocate her. She looked at Thomas, his tiny face pale, his breath shallow. She pressed her lips to Lily's forehead. It was too cool. No, she whispered, a sound lost in the howl of the wind, not like this. A last, defiant spark flickered within her. For them, she had to try. For them. She thought she was hallucinating when the shadow emerged from the swirling snow. A figure on horseback, impossibly large, a spectre against the white. Fear, sharp and primal, lanced through her exhaustion. Was this death come to claim them at last? The figure drew closer, resolving into a man, his face obscured by a low-brimmed hat and the swirling snow. He stopped his horse a few feet away, saying nothing, just looking down at her huddled form. Ilara clutched her babies tighter, a purely instinctive gesture of protection. She could not fight, could barely move, she could only wait. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind and Lily's faint whimpers. Then he dismounted, slowly, deliberately. He was tall, powerfully built, wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat that spoke of a life lived in harsh elements. His face, when he finally pushed back his hat, was weathered, etched with lines that told of sun and wind and solitude. His eyes, though, were a startling clear grey, and they held an expression she couldn't decipher. Not cruelty, not pity, something else. Observation. He took a step towards her, and she flinched, a small, involuntary movement. He stopped. He said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the storm itself, he unfastened his greatcoat. The gesture was slow, almost hesitant. He held it out. Not to her, not directly. He simply opened it, a silent offering. Then he moved with surprising speed. Before Ilara could react, before her frozen mind could process his intent, he was scooping her up, her and the precious bundles in her arms. One strong arm supported her back, the other secured the twins. He wrapped the heavy, warm sheepskin coat around all three of them, a sudden, shocking cocoon of warmth against the biting cold. Ilara was too weak, too stunned to resist. She felt herself lifted, felt the solid strength of him. There was a faint scent of pine smoke and leather, a smell so different from the sterile coldness of Silas's home. Fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overlaid with a profound exhaustion and a bewildering, nascent flicker of something she dared not name. Hope? It seemed too ludicrous. He carried her to his horse, a sturdy, dark animal that stood patiently in the blizzard. With an ease that bespoke immense strength, he mounted, settling her and the babies in front of him, shielded by his body, enveloped in his coat. The journey was a blur. The horse moved steadily, surely, through the deepening snow. Jedediah Thorne, for that was his name, though she would not learn it for some time, said nothing. He was a silent bulwark against the storm, his presence a solid reality in a world that had dissolved into chaos and ice. Ilara drifted in and out of consciousness, the rhythmic sway of the horse, the unexpected warmth, lulling her into a state of near stupor. Each time she surfaced, she expected to find it had all been a dream, that she was still freezing beneath the pine. But each time, the reality of his strong arms, the warmth of the coat, the steady beat of his heart against her back, reassured her. Is this man an angel or another threat? The uncertainty itself is a torment. If you're holding your breath for Ilara, subscribe. Her ordeal tests the very limits of human endurance. Finally, through the swirling snow, a faint light emerged. A cabin, small, rough-hewn, but with smoke curling from its chimney, a beacon in the desolate white. Jedediah dismounted, carefully lifting her down. Her legs were numb, useless. He carried her inside. The warmth hit her like a physical blow, staggering her senses. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a cheerful fire crackling within, casting dancing shadows. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a rough table, 2 chairs, a cot in the corner, but it was clean and it was warm, so incredibly warm. He gently placed her on a braided rug before the fire, unwrapping the coat. He knelt, his gaze going to the twins. Thomas was frighteningly pale, Lily's cries weaker than ever. For the first time, an emotion flickered across Jedediah's stoic face, concern. He rose and went to a small shelf, returning with a tin of condensed milk and a small pan. He moved with an economy of motion, a quiet competence that was strangely reassuring. He prepared a thinned, warmed milk. Then, with surprising gentleness, he took Thomas from Ilara's trembling arms. He found an old, clean rag, dipped it in the milk, and patiently coaxed a few drops into the baby's mouth. Then he did the same for Lily. Ilara watched, tears finally thawing on her cheeks, silent and unchecked. This stranger, this mountain of a man, was tending to her children with a care she hadn't seen since William. She didn't know what to think, what to feel. He worked methodically, his large hands surprisingly deft. He found an old wooden crate, lined it with a clean sack and a spare blanket from his cot, creating a makeshift cradle which he placed near the hearth. He settled the babies into it, their tiny forms almost lost. Only then did he turn his attention fully to Ilara. He examined her hands and feet, his touch surprisingly gentle as he checked for frostbite. "Some," he grunted, his first word to her. It wasn't unkind, just a statement of fact. He found some salve in a tin and carefully applied it to her reddened skin. He ladled stew from a pot simmering by the fire into a wooden bowl and handed it to her, along with a piece of coarse bread. The food was simple, but to Ilara it was a feast. She ate slowly, her body aching, her mind reeling. He sat on the other chair, watching the fire, saying nothing, allowing her space. The silence was not uncomfortable, it was a respite. Days blurred into a routine of survival and slow healing. Jedediah Thorne was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He chopped wood, hunted for food, tended the fire, and always ensured Ilara and the twins had what they needed. He never intruded, never asked questions, never made her feel like a burden. He simply provided. The warmth of the cabin, the regular food, the absence of threat, it was a balm to Ilara's ravaged spirit. The twins, under his quiet care and the warmth of the fire, began to rally. Thomas's color returned, and Lily's cries grew stronger, demanding. Ilara slowly regained her strength. She began to help with small chores, mending, stirring the stew, keeping the small cabin tidy. It felt good to be useful, to contribute however little. She would watch Jedediah as he worked, his movements economical and precise. He moved with a quiet confidence, a man at peace in his harsh environment. She wondered about him, this solitary man who had plucked them from the jaws of death. What was his story? Why was he alone in this remote place? But she dared not ask. The fragile peace between them was too precious to risk. One evening, as she rocked Lily by the fire, the baby finally asleep, she looked up to find Jedediah watching her. His expression was unreadable in the flickering light. "Ilara," she said softly, her voice still raspy from disuse and the lingering cold. "My name is Ilara, and these are Thomas and Lily." He nodded slowly. "Jedediah," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "Jedediah Thorne." It was a beginning, a tiny seed of connection planted in the frozen ground of her despair. The silence that followed was different, softer. Shared names, shared space, a fragile understanding. The quiet moments accumulated, a shared glance when one of the twins gurgled, the way he would leave a freshly brewed cup of willow bark tea for her when her cough was bad, the way his large hand would sometimes, almost accidentally, brush hers when he passed her a bowl. Each small gesture chipped away at the ice around her heart. She began to see not just a rescuer, but a man. A good man. The raw, desolate fear she had lived with for so long began to recede, replaced by a tentative, fragile sense of safety. She was starting to breathe again. You can feel that change, can't you? That first breath of hope. Subscribe, because the journey to true safety is paved with such moments, and also with new, unforeseen trials. Spring arrived slowly, tentatively, melting the deep snows, bringing the first green shoots to the harsh land. Life in Jedediah's cabin settled into a rhythm. Ilara took over the cooking and mending, her hands growing capable again. The twins thrived, their babbling and occasional laughter filling the small space with a life it had never known. Jedediah, though still quiet, seemed lighter. He would sometimes watch the children with a softness in his grey eyes that made Ilara's heart ache in a new, unfamiliar way. He even carved them small, smooth wooden animals, his large hands surprisingly skilled. One day, a grizzled trapper named Ben, an infrequent visitor to Jedediah's remote claim, stopped by for supplies and news. He shared coffee and jerky, his eyes lingering on Ilara and the children with open curiosity, but he asked no impertinent questions of Jedediah. As he was leaving, however, he mentioned something that made Ilara's blood run cold. "Heard down at Miller's Crossing," Ben said, scratching his beard, "some fella named Silas Blackwood's been asking about a runaway woman, claimed she stole from him. Had 2 young'uns with her," he said. Ben spat. Sounded like a nasty piece of work, that Silas. Ilara felt the warmth drain from her face. Silas. He hadn't forgotten. He wouldn't just let her disappear. The fragile peace she had found shattered like thin ice. The old fear, cold and sickening, clawed its way back up her throat. Jedediah's face hardened as he listened, his eyes becoming flinty. He thanked Ben for the information, his voice carefully neutral. After the trapper left, an uneasy silence descended on the cabin. "He won't find you here," Jedediah said finally, his voice rough. But Ilara knew Silas. His greed was a relentless master. He wanted William's farm free and clear, with no inconvenient widow or heirs to complicate matters. He would twist the truth, paint her as a villain, a thief, an unfit mother. He might even try to claim the children, perhaps to appear merciful to the community, or worse, to use them. The thought made her physically ill. The old nightmares returned, filled with Silas's cold eyes and Martha's bitter condemnations. She worried not just for herself and the twins, but for Jedediah. She had brought this danger to his door, this quiet man who had shown her nothing but kindness. "He's my late husband's brother," she whispered, twisting her apron in her hands. He drove us out. He wants the farm. He told everyone I was a burden, unlucky." She couldn't bring herself to repeat Martha's cruelest words. "He'll lie. He'll do anything." Jedediah listened, his expression grim. He rose and began to check the door, the shutters on the small window, his movements deliberate. "This is your home now, Ilara," he said, his back to her. "Yours and the babes. He won't take you, not while I draw breath." His words were a vow, simple and absolute. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He offered his strength, his protection, and in his quiet resolve, Ilara found a sliver of courage to fight the returning tide of fear. He was right. This was their home now, and she would not let Silas destroy it. The waiting was a torment. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig sent a jolt of anxiety through Ilara. She watched Jedediah, saw the new tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze constantly scanned the tree line. He taught her how to load and fire an old rifle he kept, his hands firm over hers, guiding her. "Just in case," he'd said gruffly. The feel of the cold metal, the power it represented, was both frightening and strangely empowering. She prayed she would never have to use it. The confrontation, when it came, was almost a relief after the weeks of gnawing suspense. It was a late afternoon, the sun slanting through the trees, casting long shadows. Jedediah was chopping wood, the rhythmic thud of his axe a familiar sound. Ilara was inside, humming softly to Thomas and Lily as they played on a blanket near the hearth. A harsh voice shattered the peace. "Thorne, Jedediah Thorne, I know you're in there, and I know you've got what's mine." Ilara's heart leaped into her throat. Silas. She peeked through a crack in the shutters. There he was, mounted on a nervous horse, his face contorted with malice. Beside him were 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize, and to her horror, the local magistrate, a portly, officious man named Henderson, whom Silas had clearly swayed with his lies or money. If your own heart is pounding for Ilara, know that this is the moment heroes are forged. Subscribe, because how she and Jedediah face this will define their future. Jedediah straightened slowly, axe still in hand. He moved to stand before the cabin door, a silent, formidable guardian. "State your business, Blackwood." Jedediah's voice was dangerously calm. "My business is with the thief you're harboring," Silas sneered, pointing a dramatic finger towards the cabin. "Ilara Blackwood. She fled my charity, stole family heirlooms, and absconded with my brother's children. Magistrate Henderson is here to see justice done." Magistrate Henderson puffed out his chest. "Mr. Thorne, I have a warrant here for the return of one Ilara Blackwood and her children to the custody of her legal guardian, Mr. Silas Blackwood. Best not make trouble." Ilara felt a wave of dizziness. Legal guardian, the audacity of his lies. She clutched Thomas and Lily, her fear warring with a rising tide of fury. Jedediah didn't move. "She stole nothing," he said, his voice flat. "And these children are with their mother, where they belong." "She's an unfit mother, a vagrant," Silas spat. "The children will be better off with me." That was when Ilara found her voice. Pushing open the cabin door, she stepped out, blinking in the sunlight, the twins held tightly. Her legs trembled, but her gaze was steady as she fixed it on Silas. "You lie, Silas," she said, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. "You drove us out. You left us to die in a blizzard. These men," she gestured to Jedediah, "saved our lives. You call that charity?" Silas's face darkened with rage. "Slanderous witch, she's addled your mind, Thorne." He made a move to dismount, his hired men shifting uneasily. "Grab her." One of the hired men, emboldened by the magistrate's presence, started forward. Jedediah moved like lightning. He dropped the axe and in 2 swift strides was between the man and Ilara. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stood there, a mountain of quiet fury. The hired man faltered, then stopped. There was something in Jedediah's eyes, a primal warning that gave even the magistrate pause. "She speaks the truth, magistrate," Ilara cried, her voice ringing with desperate conviction. "My husband, William, left me and his children what little he had. Silas wants it all. He told me himself there was no room for us. He sent us into a deadly storm with nothing but a thin blanket." Her words, raw with pain and truth, hung in the air. The 2 hired men exchanged uncertain glances. They were thugs, perhaps, but even they seemed to recognize the ring of truth in a desperate mother's voice. Silas, seeing his authority challenged and his narrative crumbling, lost control. "She's lying. The woman's hysterical. Seize her, I say." He spurred his horse forward, reaching for Ilara. It happened fast. Jedediah shoved Silas back with a powerful arm, sending him stumbling against his horse. At the same moment, Ilara, fueled by a fierce maternal rage, screamed, "He tried to take the food from my baby's mouths even before William was cold in his grave. He and his mother wished us dead." Her voice cracked with emotion, but it was potent. The magistrate looked deeply uncomfortable now, the veneer of his authority slipping. One of Silas's men, perhaps seeing the tide turn, or perhaps just unwilling to fight a man like Jedediah over a family squabble that smelled increasingly rotten, muttered, "This ain't what we signed on for, Silas." He backed away. The other man looked to the magistrate, who was now mopping his brow, avoiding Silas's furious glare. Now, Mr. Blackwood," Henderson stammered, "perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. This is clearly a delicate family matter." "Misunderstanding?" Silas shrieked, his face purple. "She's a thief and a liar. And you," he jabbed a finger at Jedediah, "you'll pay for this." But his threats were hollow now. His support had evaporated. He was alone, his malice exposed. He glared at Ilara, his eyes promising retribution. Then, with a curse, he wrenched his horse around and galloped away, his remaining cohort and a visibly relieved magistrate trailing in his wake. The sudden silence was profound. Ilara swayed, the adrenaline leaving her weak and trembling. Jedediah was instantly by her side, his hand gently on her arm. "It's all right, Ilara," he said, his voice softer now. "They're gone." He led her back into the cabin, his presence a comforting shield. He had a shallow cut on his forearm where Silas's spur had scraped him in the scuffle. It was a small wound, but it symbolized the battle fought and won. For now, the immediate threat was gone, but Ilara knew Silas. His greed and hatred would not simply disappear. Yet in that moment, looking at Jedediah's strong, kind face, a different feeling bloomed in her chest, stronger than fear, gratitude, and something akin to love. Later, After the twins were asleep, Ilara cleaned and bandaged the cut on Jedediah's arm. Her touch was gentle, her proximity intimate in the quiet cabin. The air was thick with unspoken emotions. "Thank you, Jedediah," she whispered, her eyes meeting his. "You saved us. Again." He looked down at her, his grey eyes searching her face. "He won't be back soon," Jedediah said. "Not like that." He was shamed. He paused, then continued, his voice hesitant, uncharacteristically so. "Ilara, this place, it's rough, but it's safe. Safer than out there for you and the little ones." He took a breath. "It could be your home, properly. Theirs." Ilara looked around the small, warm cabin. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was where she had found safety, kindness, and a strength she hadn't known she possessed. It was where her children had thrived against all odds. Jedediah cleared his throat. "I ain't much for words, Ilara, but I'd be honored if you'd be my wife. Let me be a father to Thomas and Lily. Give them my name. Protect them." "Protect you, always." His proposal wasn't flowery or romantic in the conventional sense. It was grounded, honest, born from shared hardship and a deep, burgeoning affection. It was everything she needed. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, but these were not tears of sorrow. "Yes, Jedediah," she breathed. "Yes, I will." The simple words sealed their future. A new chapter, unlooked for, yet deeply welcomed. They were married a week later by a traveling preacher Jedediah knew, a stern but fair man who asked few questions. Ben, the trapper, stood as their witness, looking on with a pleased grin. It was a simple ceremony, held in the clearing in front of the cabin, the spring wildflowers their only decoration. Thomas and Lily, oblivious to the solemnity, gurgled happily in a basket at their feet. When Jedediah slipped a roughly hammered gold band, a ring he confessed he'd made himself years ago from a small nugget, never knowing who it might be for, onto her finger, Ilara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was real. This was her family. This was home. Life on Thorn's claim, now their claim, took on a new dimension. They worked together, Ilara's resourcefulness complementing Jedediah's strength and knowledge of the land. They enlarged the garden, planted fruit trees. Jedediah added a room to the cabin, a space for the growing twins. Laughter, once a stranger to Ilara's lips, became a frequent sound. Thomas and Lily, now sturdy toddlers, adored Jedediah. Their first attempts at Papa Jed melted his stoic reserve in a way nothing else could. Ilara watched them, her heart overflowing. The shadows of Silas and Martha, the biting cold of that terrible winter, began to recede, replaced by the warmth of her new life, her new love. She was no longer Ilara, the abandoned widow, the victim. She was Ilara Thorn, wife, mother, strong and cherished. This profound transformation, from the edge of oblivion to a life filled with purpose and love, is a powerful reminder, isn't it? Subscribe. I promise you tomorrow's story will prove that even the deepest wounds can heal. Years passed, season blending into season, marked by the growth of their children and the deepening of their love. The cabin became a true home, filled with the scent of baking bread, the sound of children's chatter, and the quiet contentment of a family bound by more than just circumstance. Thomas grew tall and thoughtful like Jedediah, Lily spirited and kind like her mother. They were Thorn children, through and through, knowing no other father than the quiet, strong man who had rescued them from the snow and taught them to read by the firelight, who showed them the secrets of the forest and the strength of a gentle hand. Ilara often found herself standing at the cabin door, watching Jedediah work their land or play with the children, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. She would touch the simple gold band on her finger, a constant reminder of the day her life had truly begun anew. The journey had been brutal, the cruelty she endured unforgivable. But it had led her here, to this man, this family, this life. She learned that resilience was not just about surviving, but about daring to hope, to trust, to love again after unimaginable loss. Jedediah, in his quiet way, had taught her that true strength lay not in hardness, but in compassion, in the courage to protect and cherish. The judgment of others, once a crushing weight, now seemed distant and irrelevant. What mattered was the truth of their lives, the love that filled their home. One day, Ben the trapper brought news from the settlements further east. Silas Blackwood, he reported, had lost the farm. His greed had led him into foolish ventures, bad debts. He was a broken man, his arrogance stripped away, left with nothing but the bitterness Martha still heaped upon him. Ilara listened, and felt not triumph, nor even satisfaction. Only a quiet sadness for the waste of a life, and a deeper thankfulness for her own blessings. Justice, it seemed, sometimes arrived on silent feet, in the natural course of things. Jedediah had formally adopted Thomas and Lily years ago. They were legally, as well as emotionally, his. Their roots were now sunk deep into the soil of this mountain refuge. Her transformation was complete. The haunted, desperate woman who had stumbled through a blizzard was a distant memory. In her place stood a confident wife and mother, her eyes clear, her spirit whole. She had found her sanctuary, not in a place, but in the love of her family. She sometimes thought of returning to the community that had cast her out, not for revenge, but to show them what they had discarded. But the urge always passed. Her life was here, full and rich, with Jedediah and their children. Their future was not about looking back, but about building forward, day by day, with love and quiet strength. As the sun dipped below the rugged peaks, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ilara stood with Jedediah on the porch of their cabin. Thomas and Lily were chasing fireflies in the growing dusk, their laughter echoing in the clear mountain air. Jedediah slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with years of shared understanding and unspoken love. This was peace, this was belonging. This was the enduring hope that had risen from the ashes of despair, a testament to the fact that even in the deepest snows of winter, the seeds of a new spring can wait, ready to bloom under the warmth of an unexpected kindness. Her journey was one of harrowing loss and incredible love. The resilience of the human spirit, the unexpected grace found in the darkest of times, these are the stories that stay with us. Ilara found her salvation not just in a man, but in the strength within herself that he helped her uncover. Her story, and so many others like it, remind us that hope can be a shelter, and love, a home. Subscribe. Let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow, another tale of courage against the odds, of love that defies despair. You won't want to miss it.